This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's December 2nd, 2024. On this day, in 1766, Sweden's legislature passed the first known law protecting the freedom of speech. It abolished official censorship of all printed publications in Sweden and gave citizens the right to access government documents. There was, however, a rather tricky little bit of legalese slipped in that still put up hurdles to anyone wanting to criticize the government or Sweden's king. Instead of the government censoring those topics, that power was given instead to publishers. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. In the United States, the freedom of speech is guaranteed by a much more simply written piece of language, the First Amendment. That simplicity offers a much broader concept of protected speech. And right now, the First Amendment is very much on the minds of Tennesseans disturbed by the way that individual books are increasingly being banned in public schools. 2 years ago, the state legislature passed a law creating a process to review and remove books that are deemed inappropriate for school children. That law did not include guidelines for where the line should be drawn. Instead, schools were told that every book students could potentially access in the library, on a teacher's shelf, all of them should be listed online for parents to review what's available to their kids. And then parents could challenge any titles that they didn't think belonged in a school. This year, the legislature revisited the issue and passed language into law that specifically bars schools from keeping books with nudity, anything considered sexual, excess violence, or sadomasochistic abuse. Now, that language doesn't differentiate between what's appropriate for an elementary school student just starting to read independently, a middle schooler whose curiosity outpaces their readiness for mature material, or a high school senior in an honors English class who is ready to read, discuss, and evaluate challenging literature. Since the initial law was passed, highly conservative groups like Moms for Liberty have put a lot of pressure on districts to unilaterally strip certain books from schools, with little consideration for how those texts would be used or their potential value for some groups of students. And more, districts and individual librarians are going ahead and removing anything that might be challenged rather than waiting for parents to complain. Wilson County Schools has removed 400 books so far, and Chalkbeat reports several other districts are reportedly using that county's list as a guide, or at least food for thought, for what books they should ban too. The Tennessee Lookout notes that Wilson County's banned books list bears a strong resemblance to those rated as explicit in some way on the website booklooks.org. That site has been strongly criticized for being very heavy-handed and taking passages out of context. Wherever it comes from, the Wilson County list includes The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, about a young black girl suffering from abuse at home and struggling to accept herself in a society that values whiteness. There's the graphic novel Persepolis that shows a young girl's difficulties growing up amid the increasingly restrictive environment of Iran's Islamic Revolution. Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, banned. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, banned. The Color Purple, Slaughterhouse-Five, Doctor Seuss's Wacky Wednesday, the picture book No, David. All of them are banned. The list includes classics that deal with difficult issues like race and war, and an awful lot of stories with LGBTQ themes. In the last month alone, Rutherford County Schools removed 150 books. And it's not just in schools. Late last year, the public library system in Rutherford also took steps to dramatically restrict minors' access to books in the adult section. Nothing was taken off the shelves, and parents can sign a waiver to say they don't want that policy to apply to their kids. But without that paperwork, a teenager trying to check out a book that isn't in the kids section, like something by Shakespeare or Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, is out of luck. As they say, nothing is new under the sun. And basically, this exact issue came before the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1975. That case centered on a school district that removed books deemed to be anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, and just plain filthy. The High Court issued a nuanced ruling. On the one hand, it found that a school board could not restrict students' access to books simply because local officials didn't agree with the content. That would be a violation of the First Amendment. On the other hand, the court did say schools can express discretion in limiting what makes it onto the shelves in the first place. And interestingly, the Supreme Court opinion specifically criticized the school board in question for not listening to the opinions of librarians and teachers. Instead, they used a list from an outside source. That point definitely brings to mind the recent accounts in multiple local news sources where educators have spoken of being afraid to keep books they strongly believe to have educational value, or heartbroken at being given the task to strip their shelves of literature that they think ought to stay there. In just a few minutes, just across the state line, Kentucky took a big swing for school choice, but voters said no. That's coming up after the newscast.
Here's the mantra I think about at WPLN. We connect the dots. It captures a mindset that our journalism is not merely about the latest press release or proclamations by officials. Instead, we can develop expertise, dig deeper, and look to history to understand what's happening now. I'm Toni Gonzalez, news director. When I'm planning coverage and editing stories, the best part is being part of a team that's curious about our community and invested in its future.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The number of people renting in Nashville is going up, while the amount of home buyers is going down. WPLN Cynthia Abrams reports there are significantly more homeowners than renters in Nashville, around twice as many.
Between the end of 2023 and 2024, the percentage of Nashville renters rose by 4.5%, while the percentage of home buyers decreased by the same rate. It's a trend seen in all three of Tennessee's largest cities: Nashville, Knoxville, and Memphis. Memphis saw the largest renter increase, with close to half the city's population now renting.
In fact, this trend rings true nationally. Real estate company Redfin did an analysis of the 75 largest American cities, showing a rise in renters and a fall in home buyers. One reason for the shift? National rent prices have risen by just 0.6%, while home prices grew by 6%. Nevertheless, Middle Tennessee has a high demand for housing of all kinds, and a report from the Tennessean says that demand includes multi-million-dollar mansions. Local realtors told the Tennessean that interest in this price range has been growing for a few years, but really surged over the past 12 months. Some say that's because more high earners are moving into the area. The housing supply is growing, especially in the suburbs. A new development is going up in Brentwood. It will include about 24 mansions with prices starting at $4 million. Builders have also proposed new mansion neighborhoods in Wilson County and Franklin. Tennessee has been trailing the U.S. average for both electric vehicle purchases and charging infrastructure. But a recent report by the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy suggests the state could start catching up. WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports.
EVs are multiplying on Tennessee's roads. In Nashville, Tesla's silver Cybertrucks are popping up in more corners of town. But Stan Cross of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy says the infrastructure to support this transition is lacking.
EV adoption has been expanding exponentially, and EV charging has not been keeping up.
So almost all EV charging happens at home. But public chargers are important for long-distance travel. And as chargers become more visible, people may feel more comfortable switching to EVs. And Tennessee has fewer public chargers per person than both the Southeast and national average. But the state did recently have the highest one-year increase in new fast chargers. So Cross says momentum might finally be gaining. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation is looking into a police shooting that happened in Crossville this weekend. The incident involved Cumberland County Sheriff's Office deputies. TBI laid out the details available so far in a press release. It said officers arrived at a home in the early morning hours Saturday after someone called in to report shots fired. They found a 22-year-old man in the driveway with a handgun, according to early reports. Officers said the man refused to drop the gun, then fired in their direction. At least one deputy fired back, killing him. This is the 49th police shooting case the TBI has said it's investigating this year. During these investigations, TBI officers act as fact finders, and local district attorneys decide whether to pursue charges. Other incidents in November included non-fatal shootings by Metro Nashville Police, the Knoxville Police Department, and a lethal shooting in Hardeman County. Tennessee schools and school districts now have their overall verdict on how the last school year went. The State Department of Education released its annual list of school designations. 377 schools were singled out as reward schools, and 10 districts met the benchmark for being considered exemplary. That list includes the Lebanon Special School District. On the other end of the spectrum, 10 districts were identified as needing improvement. If you'd like more information about how your school performed, the state also calculates letter grades for each school, which can be found on the Department of Education's website. A vibrant arts community with both established and up-and-coming visual artists adds to the social well-being of a city. But that's only one part of the equation. Art galleries are also essential. In the last decade, Nashville has seen an expansion of galleries in many neighborhoods. Artist and Wedgwood Houston Gallery owner Julia Martin tells This Is Nashville that the city's growth has led to a more robust art market and allowed the scene to evolve from competitive to supportive.
One of the blessings of the growth of this city is that each neighborhood is kind of like its own little borough. You know, they're like little micro cities. There's enough for everyone to go around. We all bring something unique to the table. And so it is easy to be cheerleaders for each other and celebrate the tide rising.
You can hear a full profile on Martin at noon today on WPLN or in the This Is Nashville podcast feed. The next opening at her gallery is December 7th and will feature the work of Will Morgan Holland. $3.6 million in federal clean energy grants are headed to Tennessee. 20 of the state's farms and businesses were picked in the latest round of funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The cash will go towards things like solar power installation and energy efficiency improvements. Altogether, the Tennessee Lookout reports the grant recipients are expected to save or generate enough electricity to power 415 homes for an entire year. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Proponents of school choice in Kentucky had high hopes for a proposal known as Amendment 2. It was on the November 5th ballot, and many believed traditionally blue urban areas of the state would vote in favor of the initiative. Instead, it failed overwhelmingly. Reporter Sylvia Goodman with our partner Kentucky Public Radio discussed the results in this interview with managing editor Ryan Van Velzer.
So first, refresh our memory on what Amendment 2 is.
Sure. So it was one of two statewide questions that was on the ballot this year. It would have changed the Constitution, given the legislature the power to spend state dollars on K through 12 private or charter schools. Our Constitution is pretty restrictive in that regard. Public money currently can only be spent on the system of common schools. And it was a crazy expensive campaign. As of about mid-October, we know that upwards of $14 million was spent. And after all that, including more than $7.6 million in support of the amendment, it failed resoundingly.
What do you mean, resoundingly?
Not one of Kentucky's 120 counties voted in favor of it.
Wow, that is surprising. And I'm curious what you found when you dug into the data, especially in those three most populous counties, Jefferson, Fayette, and Kenton.
Yeah, and, not surprisingly, they're also the counties with the highest concentrations of private schools. A third of all private schools in the state are located there. And in many ways, proponents of the amendment were counting on those counties to support the amendment. Rural areas were always going to be a tough sell in Kentucky. About half of the 120 counties don't have a single private school in them, and in many, public schools are the largest employer.
So what did you learn when you looked more closely at those three counties?
Well, even in those counties, there are extremely few green dots, as in, precincts that voted in favor of the amendment. Even proximity to private schools didn't seem to have much of a positive effect for Amendment 2. The three bigger precincts that voted yes, and again, there were just about a dozen out of 627 that did, don't have a single certified private school in them. One of the supporters I spoke to told me he thought the messaging was off, that the focus should have been on the possibility of charter schools rather than a focus on the state potentially paying for private school tuition. This is Trey Watson, a longtime Kentucky political consultant.
When you look across the country where a similar law change or states that have similar capabilities in their laws charter schools tend to be the more successful and more popular usage of that law in urban areas.
So basically, he's arguing that charter schools would have been more popular. They've been found in several other blue states, blue urban areas, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. And he thought that would have been more popular messaging, potentially, than talking about private school tuition.
And another interesting dynamic you talked about was how the amendment was tied to the presidential election in some ways. Some surprising trends there, right?
Yeah, supporters tried to pitch the amendment by tying it to President-elect Donald Trump. And to be fair, universal school choice is a major part of his education platform. But clearly, that was not convincing for many Kentuckians. In some of the rural counties where Trump had the greatest advantage, Amendment 2 had the least success. For example, in Monroe County, along the Tennessee border, Trump won with 89% of the vote. But 70.5% of those same group of voters rejected Amendment 2.
Thanks for breaking that down for us, Sylvia. I'm Kentucky Public Radio Managing Editor Ryan Van Velzer, speaking with Capitol reporter Sylvia Goodman.
You can find a complete breakdown of Kentucky's election data related to the school choice proposal on our website, WPLN.org. Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.